Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our summer reading program, The Future of the Wind Band. Super excited for tonight. It is going to be a great conversation. We've got two topics that have been circling around the wind band community. I'm looking forward to getting some thoughts and ideas from our guests. And without any further ado, I'd like to bring on our first two guests. Bill, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good. And we met you last week, but just introduce yourself one more time. You are the author of the new book that we're working on right now.
The editor of the volume, The Future of the Wind Band. I'm also the director of bands at Concordia University in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Awesome. And we are blessed to have Thomas G. Warner Jr. from North Carolina A&T State University. Thomas, really appreciate you. I can't thank you enough. This was we weren't anticipating having you on. I'm so glad that you were able to make it with us tonight. So tell us a little bit about your story.
As stated, I am currently at North Carolina A&T State University. I currently serve as assistant director of bands, and I'm also a music lecturer in our music department. I'm a native of Atlanta, Georgia. Went to a small college, Morris Brown College in Atlanta, a graduate of the Florida State University College of Music, and currently working on a PhD at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And I've enjoyed my journey so far, and just looking to definitely make a difference in the world of music and wind band and music education.
Awesome. That also you live right down the road from me. I'm in Burlington, North Carolina, and you're in Greensboro, which is just a couple hops down the interstate there. So really glad to have you on tonight. So Bill, in our conversation last week, we talked about repertoire in the wind band, and tonight we're going to be covering economic justice and democratic citizenship. And Thomas, you were a contributor to the chapter on economic justice. Yes. And looking forward to having you involved in the conversation as we talk tonight and kind of struggle with some of these challenges that we're seeing in the wind band in the contemporary U.S. that we live in. But Bill, in reading these two chapters and the chapters on democratic citizenship, that one especially, you have very contrasting opinions with the approach to that concept. And I think there's a lot of tie-in between the two. I think there's definitely a lot of we're on the same page with a lot of the same concepts and everything. But from an editing point of view, I'm curious, what was the process that you used to get these great educators and band directors to come and be a part of this project?
Yeah, it really, in some ways, on the philosophical side of things, it was a little bit easier for me because I had a general idea of the type of topics that I wanted to talk about, and a lot of the philosophers, I had ideas. Like when I was talking about economic justice, I was honestly thinking about Vincent's work, and when I was thinking about democratic citizen, I was thinking about Paul Woodford's work. Because these are people that have written on the topics all throughout the entire volume. And I was tickled pink because basically on the philosophy side of things, I asked the people that I really wanted to write on those topics, and they all said yes. And that was just really, really good. The process on the conductor side of things was a little bit different. I had some ideas about people or individuals that I wanted to write. For example, I knew, and we're going to talk with Cindy Johnson Turner next week, and I sort of knew she was doing some innovative things in the rehearsal technique area, and I knew Carolyn Barber because she was my graduate conducting teacher at Nebraska. I knew she was doing some interesting things in terms of creativity, but I also wanted a wide variety of voices, and so with Thomas, I never met Thomas before. This is actually the first time I've actually spoken with Thomas. We've obviously corresponded by email a lot, but it was sort of in bringing a lot of voices to the table. In this instance, I felt like the voice of the HBCU community has been very silent, not on their part, but on the part of being overlooked in a lot of professional discussions related to band directing. And that's an important part of our history. of band directing in the United States of America. It's not prominent in a lot of our written histories of what the bands have been in America, but certainly if we're talking about the future, we also have to understand our past and our present. And so I wanted someone representing that. And so basically what I did is I went to the HBCU Consortium website. I saw that Thomas at that point in time was serving as the president. So I started with him. He said yes. And I was like, great. And then we just sort of went from there.
So Thomas, you are working on your doctorate. You are a full-time college band director, music educator. This seems like another thing on your plate of the many hats that you wear as an educator, as a student. So what was it about this topic that motivated you to write on this subject?
Well, it was definitely part of my process, going through the PhD, and a lot of political writings, a lot of things that were definitely connected to just my areas, just the tenets that I had within my my research proposal, and definitely, because I was asked by Bill to tackle this particular topic, but it's something that I think that should be addressed. This conversation should be had in terms of, I guess you could say that equity and the justice across the board. We want to make sure that all of the students, no matter what they look like, they have the same opportunities, regardless.
Right. Now, did from your experience, because you said that you were from the Atlanta area, is that where you
Yes.
did your teaching prior to moving to the college level?
Yes. So, of course, I was born and raised there. Did all of my student teaching. Went straight into graduate school, and then came back and taught. And then I went to the collegiate level after that, and I kind of did it both, together. I was teaching on the high school level and doing the collegiate level at the same time. But being from that area, I've seen some of those, I guess you can say, the injustices or the differences within the communities. And just with my background, I've grown through it. I've grown up with it and seen some of those situations where students, including myself, we just did not have some of the resources that other schools had. But definitely, as I taught in specific school systems, you could see it in certain areas, depending on which part of those areas that you're teaching in. And of course, in the city of Atlanta, the metro area, you have several school districts that have just huge diversity across the board in terms of population, in terms of funding. So it's really, from my experience, I've seen a lot in terms of, a lot of the topics that we'll probably cover.
Right. Well, in reading your essay, I really gleaned a lot from, and we'll talk about this as we come, but one of the topics that kind of came up was involving the community and knowing the community that you live in. How has that changed maybe from moving from the Atlanta area to Greensboro and going to the college level at A&T?
Well, I think it stands the same across the board. I think within the communities that I've worked, it just varies. I worked in schools where I've had a strong parental base. It may be an area where the businesses and stakeholders may not be as plentiful, you know what I mean?
Right.
And but it just depends on where that particular school is. In certain areas, like I've worked in a community where it was a high transit community. So then one year I might have a large group of students, and the next year I may not. I just don't know if that same population is going to be back. And in terms of that, it could have been a community where we had a large immigration population. Mm-hmm. So some of those students who are part of the population could have been counted differently depending on, the reporting system of the county and the principals. So it just varies. But I've seen in terms of like stakeholders, there are some parents that are prominent. They have the monies, they have 3 or 4 businesses, and they'll openly say, hey, if you need anything, if you need instruments, if you need us to fund, some clinicians or bring in some directors from, this area or the other, then it happens. In terms of the collegiate level, I would say at North Carolina A&T, we are highly engaged. Unless there's something that keeps us from participating, it could be a busy schedule with the football season, but we try to do local parades. We try to do anything that's going to show our engagement. And of course, we're looking for occasional fundraisers and things that can help our booster organization and just building relationships. So if we need those connections or partners, same, and I look at it in terms of like your athletic department. So let's say, your football teams, they'll have sponsors around the stadium. Those posters are up and they give deals throughout, the game or whatnot. So just looking at it from that standpoint, on the collegiate level, we're constantly trying to build those relationships.
Right.
Because we just never know where some of those might come in handy. It could be instruments, it could be uniform cleaning. It's a lot of things across the board. There are some schools that will have the funds to operate, and there are some that just don't have the funds to operate. So building those relationships are very important.
Right. Awesome. And I'm looking forward to our conversation tonight. We've got a great panel of band directors from around the U.S. and even Canada again tonight. So without any further ado, we have a quick ad from our sponsor, Amano Music, and we'll be right back with our panel.
WinConductor.org's Maestro Moments is brought to you tonight through the support of Amano Music. Amano Music is a collective for composers and a resource to band directors. Find the very best in wind band repertoire, from classic marches, updated and edited for contemporary wind ensembles, to the latest from innovative independent composers like the piece you're listening to right now, Chatterbox by Jason McChristian. You will also find resources for the band classroom, including books on topics important to band directors, as well as methods like mastering the scales to prepare your band to tackle rigorous repertoire. You can find Amano Music by visiting their website at www.amanomusic.com. That's Amano Music with a double A.
All right, so let's go ahead and bring in our panel. I want to start with my right-hand man. I really appreciate everything he does behind the scenes. Josh, how you doing, man? Thank you so much for all that you do for these Maestro moments. And we've got several other band directors. We've got 2 returning band directors. We got Ruth Petersen from North Carolina. We have Mike Dominy, who conducts an adult community band in British Columbia, Canada. Joining us, he was here last week and has some great input, both of our panelists who are returning this week. And we also have 2 newcomers. So, and I'm going to bring on Ron Isaacson from Virginia. I'm going to have Ron tell us a little bit about yourself.
Let's see. Well, if I've been employed now, about to start my 9th year at Bishop O'Connell High School in Arlington, Virginia, which I'm sure everybody knows is suburban Washington, D.C. I've kind of said, had a very circuitous route to this position. But I'll tell you, this is the best job I've ever had in my life. It's, even with the problems with COVID and everything, I've just had full support from administration and the community, and it's just been great.
Awesome.
We have a small band program, but we're building it back.
Awesome. And joining us from Missouri, we have Grant Maledy. Did I pronounce that correctly, Grant?
It's Maledy. It's just
Maledy.
Just like it doesn't look. So shout out to immigration on that one. Happy to. I see that. Yeah, that looks like there's a lot of consonants in there, Josh. So I'm at Hillcrest High School in Springfield, Missouri. Springfield's Missouri's 3rd largest city, and we're the smallest high school in the 3rd largest city in the state and the largest district. I just finished my first year here at Hillcrest. This is my 17th year in teaching in Missouri.
Awesome. So the goal of tonight is to begin the dialogue on these topics of economic justice and democratic citizenship. So we are blessed to have the editor of The Future of the Wind Band with us, Bill Perrine, and also the one of our contributors for the topics tonight, Thomas Warner from North Carolina. And we're going to start with the section on economic justice. And the first essay that you come to in the book is by Vincent Bates, and it is the school wind bands and the preservation of American capitalism. Some of the things that popped out to me and tonight's conversation, these are just kind of guiding or leading questions. They are not intended for us to come up with the answer specifically, not that we really could, but just to begin the dialogue towards these things. But as I was reading it, one of the things that Vincent started out with was the idea of cutting edge technologies and the wind band. I'd also like to talk about is the band culturally relevant? How has corporate marketing impacted the modern wind band? And is lifelong musicking the objective of the wind band? Does band have a monopoly in instrumental music education? And does that diminish the wind band's value or overshadow other instrumental opportunities? Should competition be a part of the wind band education, and should the number of bands be cut in half? That was kind of his closing remarks there. So let's go ahead and get started talking about that essay. What were some of the things that stood out to you?
Well, I'll start it since my picture is the giant one in the screen. The thing that I'm curious to get everybody's thoughts on is the thing about is the wind band tasked with creating lifelong musicians essentially and lifelong musicking, because the vibe I got was that the argument that, maybe this is not what we're doing. It's what we think we're doing, but in actuality, not the case. And so I reached out on social media, just said, I essentially put that quote in there, and, I got some responses, and from digging through those responses, what I garnered was the lifelong musicking is really impacted by the type of band room and the environment and the atmosphere of that particular program that student is involved in. What is the driving goal when you walk in the door and sit down? Is it about, competition, or is it about music? And that, I think, is another conversation we're going to get into also, but I was curious what other people thought about that.
Josh, I'll just say this as someone who, part of my daily job is to recruit students to play in my band at the university level. And without jumping right onto the competition aspect of things, I do think in some cases the competition can be a detriment to, especially if it's hyper competitive, the lifelong music making, because I run into students all the time that are just sort of burnt out on that. That by the time they get to college, they've been doing this like 3 hour a day, 5, 6, 7 days a week, hyper competitive marching band. And they just don't want anything to do with it when they're done. And that I just see that on a fairly regular basis, unfortunately.
So let me ask you this, and let's get into the group here. How many of you have, and obviously our college colleagues here, how many of you have a competitive marching band program?
I wouldn't say we're competitive, but we go to competitions.
Okay.
And I
Josh?
should say, hey, by the way, I said that as someone who did do competitive marching band when I taught high school.
Sure.
So, I'm talking to myself as much as anybody else, so yeah.
Well, I can, from an HBCU standpoint, a lot of what we do outside of like our normal football games or basketball pep band, we do exhibitions or Battle of the Bands. I know there are a few that have become popular. We've had the Honda Battle of the Bands that's been around since my senior year in undergrad, and it's not per se competitive, but it's more so in terms of people's choice. It's popularity, but to us, we want to make sure that we have it's competitive for us because we want to make sure we have a great show. And I think that's the consensus across the board for everybody that's involved. So from that collegiate aspect, it's definitely a recruitment tool. So it's competitive for us, in terms of if we do a great job, then students are going to want to be a part of our program. So we have to be highly competitive on this level.
So Thomas, something that stood out to me, and one thing that I have really struggled with. I've been teaching I just finished my 20th year, and I've struggled, and I'm speaking as someone who is adjudicated for U.S. bands, which is a very competitive core style um, uh, network. And I wonder, one of the things that I've always admired, and I think we're missing the mark in the core style is, and it goes back to what you were just talking about with the HBCU competition. It's a fan competition. We're competing for the fans. And, I think in the core style, in a lot of ways, we've tried to put Holst and Beethoven and these modern sounding works on the field, which are great from a band director. I love them. They are exciting to me as a musician who's been musicking his entire life. But, going to one of the topics, and I know we're starting off with Vincent's essay, but you talk about this, who's our audience and stuff like that. Right. And I think we've lost sight a lot of times of what our audience is.
Well, I think that goes into like the culturally relevant piece, and it expands beyond the classroom. It expands beyond the band. And I can say for us specifically, when we have extensive show planning meetings, and when we do these, we're thinking like, well, who are we going to play? Who's the audience? And let's do something outside of the box. But again, it's competitive for us. But it's popular vote, but we're constantly looking at who our crowd is. We're looking at age differences. We're looking at, your relevant topics in today's society. It could be about gender. It could be about social justice, social injustice. It could be whatever is going on at that particular moment. And it may be some other things that are just innovative shows. But we're always looking at who our crowd is and who our audience is. But it starts in our band room and starts with our staff, and when we go through all of our just show planning. So it's a long process that we funnel all the way down. But to us, it is very, very important. And at the end of the year, even though it's not like a competition, there have been some instances where there will be a popular vote. Who's ranked number 1 through 10 this year in the HBCU band world? So for us, even though it's not officially competition, it is competition for us.
Yeah, Aaron, and here's another difference between the two styles of marching versus show bands that we're talking about, and it goes back to the capitalism intersection. How common is it for a band to spend $2,000, $4,000, $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 on a top shelf show designer, or to put a gazillion props out on the field, or to hire a movement coordinator? And so, when we go to, and I'm not saying that no one should ever do that. All right. But right. I'm saying when we're talking about competition, there is definitely a have versus have nots. I worked at a Title I school, and we could not afford all of those amenities when we went out to compete. And I had to be very careful as an educator to sensitively prime my students for the fact that, band down the street, they have a budget of $80,000, $100,000, and they might charge their students hundreds of dollars to be in their competitive band. So, there are intersections here that I think we do need to think through.
Yeah. So, Grant, what is it like out in Missouri?
It is everything described from suburban to rural to urban and everything in between we have in this state. And most of it we have in this district. So we have a high school in this district that's on the BOA circuit that charges students about $1,200 a kid for their band fee. We have a high school in this district that hasn't done a competitive marching show in 17 years, 18 years. And they only do football games at home, 1 parade at Christmas. But they played the state convention 3 times in those 15 years with their concert band. So we have a little bit of everything. Here at Hillcrest, we're in a complete rebuild. Numbers were down pretty dramatically before I came in. And so we are absolutely at we spent most of last year getting the box drawn. And if I get everything done before August 1st, I'll get the 1 in, and then we'll be at square one. That's kind of where we are. And so you guys were talking about some of the things here with questions about, spending all this money on shows and that kind of thing. And we're in a situation where we have some funding. But we have students that are very inexperienced. We have possibly the most urban part of the district and definitely the most rural part of the district here on the north side of town. We just so happen to have the most densely populated, and then 6 miles north of the city, that's our attendance area. So we have an interesting dichotomy here in Hillcrest, but we do attend competitions, and it is certainly not because we're competitive at those competitions. And that is a thing we talk to the students about up front. We talk about, we are working on ourselves and making our performance better. Why are we making our performance better? For the people that are watching our show. Who are we playing to? The people that are watching our show. What are these judges going to do? Well, they're going to evaluate us. They're going to give us a number, but at the end of the day, that's really not as important as did you meet your responsibilities? Did you did you do the things that you're supposed to be doing well? As we look at that. So I think a lot of people let the tail wag the dog, and they get competition to the point, like you were speaking about, Mr. Perrine, about having the, kids that are so burnt out because they've done everything. I totally hear that. We're pretty careful about what our requirements are outside of the day, because we have a lot of kids that if the bus doesn't bring them, they aren't coming. We are going to these competitions because I want them to see what other bands are doing. I want them to see what kids their age from the same town or other towns nearby are capable of, so they understand that. But we are not. We are careful from the beginning to talk, because it's all about winning, and you don't win, now what? So we go from the very first mention of competition and talk about how it's these people that we're competing against are my friends that I've known for years. I didn't wake up this morning to really take it to those guys from the next school over. And winning music is kind of a ludicrous idea when you say it like that, and I think that communication with kids is important.
So obviously the competition aspect in its initiation, I mean, when you look at the history of the wind band and the educational wind band that grew out of the early 20th century model, competition was a huge part of it. The bands would travel to these concert band competitions to compete against one another for trophies. You read any of the history of the wind band stuff, and this was a major part of the early part of the development of the educational wind band. So getting back to the question that Josh brought up about lifelong musicking, are these techniques and the competitive atmosphere, are they enhancing that aspect, or are they I'm curious to hear the perspective of, Mike, you've got a community band. Ruth, you were a middle school band director. You got these kids started on the path, and obviously our goal is to get them to go as far as we can. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about this topic.
Being the Canadian on the group, of course, we have an entirely different perspective. We're not that competitive, and in fact, there's a joke in the military band circles, especially for those of us that were clarinet players, that the most revered chair in the clarinet section is the last chair in the third clarinet section. Right? We're not elbowing one another out of the way to be the lead player.
Right.
When I get new players come to my band, they will sit in whatever section it is in the chair that they're most comfortable sitting in. If they come in and they are comfortable sitting in second or third clarinet, bonus, especially if they're a really strong player. which actually happened 2 rehearsals ago for me. Our just quickly referring, marching band competitions aren't the thing here that they are your side of the 49th parallel. In a lot of ways, our high school marching bands are concert bands on foot. They'll do 2 or 3 parades a year. Obviously, being in Victoria, British Columbia, the Victoria Day parade is a big deal. So the 3 schools that can put together a marching band will be in that parade. And yeah, they get bragging rights as to which one got the highest mark in their evaluation in the parade. But there's no money from the school districts attached to it and things like that. The lifelong musicking, my happiest moment as a community band director occurred actually before COVID. I had 4 recent graduates from one of our high schools go, I really, really want to continue playing. They came out to the band. They were good, strong players, and they were probably my most active recruiters for the rest of the year. So I don't know if that helped, if that perspective helps or not, but that's up here. I don't think competition helps at all. People will aspire to where they feel most comfortable, and that's where we sit.
Ruth, what are some of your thoughts with the concept of the goal of the band? Is it lifelong musicking, or is there more to it?
I think it depends on the director. It depends on the community. There are so many variables that go into that. And even being a young director versus a veteran director. In my last school, I was there. I started my 15th year before I took early retirement. And I had never been in one place that long. And it was a journey for myself as a conductor and director, and it was a journey for the program. And I think as students begin to build a community with you and to see their siblings go on into the high school program, there was something very wonderful that was built between the high school and the middle school, as well as serving our communities. And sometimes competition, I think it's a balancing act. I really like, Grant's philosophy about competition and how he's approaching it with his students. And for me as a middle school director, it was always how much can I expose my students to, whether we had a jazz band or we had a percussion ensemble or we did solo and ensemble festival, just to make sure they were getting those opportunities. And I will let you know, Aaron, I've been doing a little research about the history of North Carolina bands, and contests were started in North Carolina to build the music programs in our state. So they were used for that purpose in the beginning. So it's an interesting take on our own state's history with it.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it's such a topic for debate, but I think it kind of goes with, I mentioned this last week when we were talking about repertoire and developing a philosophy. And I honestly think that America, the United States, is in an identity crisis right now where we're trying to figure out who we are as a culture, and what we were 100 years ago is definitely not what we are today, nor do we want it to be. We want to grow and continue moving forward. And these topics that we're talking about today are pertinent because, from the life of a nation, even in our own lives, I know that I'm not the band director that I was when I first took the podium when I was in the early 20s. I was much more of an authoritarian figure, like we read about in the last essay this week. But my growth and development as a human being, we expect that. We expect growth, but when we start talking about these on a national term or even on a state level, there's a lot of resistance to growth and development. So, Ron, I'm curious to get some of your thoughts on the topics that we've covered. A couple of different things, and I want us to. Bill, I knew that we were going to run into this. These topics that you selected, there's no way we can fit these into an hour. So I think for tonight, we're going to stick with economic justice. And even though we're sticking with that, we've already touched on a lot of the topics that were in the democratic citizenship. And if you guys have points that you want to bring up in the discussion tonight about along those lines, please do. But Ron, with the topics that we've talked about, you come at it from a different perspective from a public school educator.
Right. I guess when I was teaching in the public school, I had a lot of people that wanted to be very helpful with choice of music and direction of the ensembles and stuff like that. And I came at it. I guess I came up with a saying that pieces need to have a musically educational reason for being on the program. If there isn't a musically educational reason for it being on the program, what are we doing? What are we? You can't do the piece because we have to have in my previous positions you have to have equitable Christian versus Jewish versus whatever music at Christmas time, and if people keep track of that sort of thing. But I went with I didn't want to get into that hole because it was a no-win. It was a negative. And so I just said,
what do you mean by that?
Well, I was never gonna win that argument. Because people come at it with their own agendas. And what I decided to do was to take what I thought was a high road and say, here's the musically educational reasons for doing the concert. Here's what I'm trying to teach the kids and having these pieces on the program. This is these are the reasons. And I even put in a couple of schools, I even put up program notes. And so I never had another problem with it. Ironically, now I'm teaching at a Catholic school where the whole thing gets turned on its ear. But again, I don't want to do all Christmas music at Christmas time. There's music. There are other pieces I want to do, or I want to find other arrangements of interesting tunes. Everybody wants to hear Feliz Navidad, which is nice, but it gets boring year to year. So let's find some other pieces out there. So again, everything that we have on the program has a musically educational reason for being there. And that sort of solves the problem with all of the helpful parental input and other input. And the principals, they see that they see that I'm true to my course objectives, and they leave me alone on that sort of thing. So, as far as the competition, we actually about 2-3 years before I got to the school, they disbanded the marching band. And there have been numerous attempts to restart it. And I've put together proposals for it. And I guess the precinct comment, two of them actually, first precinct comment was one of my administrators looked at it and said, "Oh, that's another football team." It's like, yeah, and nobody's been willing to put in the level of support that they need to put in. And so the idea of a marching band has sort of fizzled. Comes up every once in a while, and the proposal comes back out. And, I would love to do a marching band, but I'm not going to do it myself.
That is actually a great transition to talking about the community that we're working in. Right. Because in that, Thomas, that was a big portion of the essay that you wrote. That was one of my big takeaways from where you wrote. And one of the questions, I don't think I put this in the in the notes that we talked about before. But one of the questions that I had is, we're looking at this from a national perspective, and is the answer on the national level, or is it within our own communities?
Well, I definitely think it's within our communities. I mean, and again, it goes back to being culturally relevant
Right.
in the classroom, understanding where your students come from, their backgrounds. You may not know exact details, but I know from a cultural standpoint, if being from the Southeast, if I travel to the southwest part of the United States and visit some urban communities or, predominantly Black communities, there's a different love for music, or a different aspect of it. If you go to a place like New Orleans, the state of Louisiana, you're going to find students and kids that are exposed to music way earlier than some people would recognize. And just given the history of a place like, New Orleans or the state of Louisiana, that's where a lot of, I guess you can say, culturally relevant music has history in terms of like African Americans or minorities. So the culturally knowing where the students are, where they come from, it really helps. It definitely helps. And it kind of goes into, I'm not sure if anyone on the call is familiar with the House Rights Symposium. There are several topics that have been brought up in terms of, why do humans do music, and why study music? Are we pushing these things or these values? Is it a natural occurrence in terms of where these students come from? And it goes beyond just being a student. Once, like we're saying, we're trying to continue musicking, because I've done community bands beyond college and while I started early in my career. But I really think knowing that community helps to build programs. Like, it really definitely helps. And again, I'll always go back to the culturally relevant piece. I'm usually talking about the classroom, but when you look at it in terms of the community, there's that relationship, especially if you're looking at, if you're going down from the secondary level all the way down to the earlier years of music and bands and music making. Just that connection. We really have to start the students early if they are not starting early. And it builds relationships from that early start. So that student who's seeing that they're being supported, they may not have the instrument, but somebody provided instruments for that student or several students. It helped them to stay in band and continue. And then when they got to high school, they probably saw the same thing. And again, we're talking about varied situations. There could be areas that, again, they may not even have paper to copy music. So right. It could be situations where if you start them early, if these students are exposed to great experiences, I think that helps to keep them in music and continue music making. And I think, like you said earlier, it's so much, we can't cover everything. But in terms of like national standards, making sure everything lines up from a national level to the local level, district level, we want to make sure that these experiences are meaningful experiences, but it's not always from that national standpoint. And dare I say it, we have to think, is in some instances, is Bach important in this community
right.
versus another community? Yes, it is a great part of our history and great historical, everything that you can think of from a theory standpoint to a historical standpoint. But are these students going to grasp that concept versus hearing something about the music of New Orleans? So just thinking of it from that standpoint.
Yeah, and Aaron, you'd mentioned the comment that Vince made, and I'm sorry he's not here because I'd be interested to ask him about cutting the number of bands in the country in half. and I think this goes to what Thomas is saying. I think there's a little hyperbole perhaps in there. There he is. We can ask him about it.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Vincent, welcome.
To me, I think it's making us think, like, is this relevant for the community that we're in? Is it really truly relevant what we're doing? And sometimes being provocative helps us think about that. But Vince is here, so maybe we can ask him. So,
Vince, welcome to the show. I'm glad you're able to join us. We were just discussing relevance and also being culturally relevant within our communities and everything. And just curious, Bill, you had a question about you closed, Vincent, you closed your essay with that the number of bands in the U.S. Could be cut in half and whatnot. And obviously that is a strong statement. And as a band director, I definitely don't want to see that, but that's been my whole life and stuff. So.
Are you asking me there?
Yeah.
Well, that's just commenting on the monopoly that band directors have over instrumental music education. So I talked to band director after band director that will not allow any other instrumental music education in their school. And I've watched band director after band director go into small schools, try to develop a program. As soon as they're gone, the program dies. So I'm just thinking we could do something different for a lot of kids. My own kids would love to play guitar at school. They're not allowed to play guitar at school because band directors stand in their way. They don't have, they have a lot of things they need to do at home as well. They learn guitar here at home, but why can't they do an elective at school that they want to do in instrumental music?
And a lot of that, go ahead.
well, I was just going to ask Vince, because you're in a little different part of the country in the West, and there are a lot of the rural school districts. Do you think that sometimes is like a hoarding of resources, like in a large school district, maybe like, okay, well, we can add in a couple of guitar classes and not detract, but if we've got limited amount of time, then we need to keep this one thing here.
It's that singular focus of the band director. And here in the urban area where I live, along the Wasatch Front, I live in the two biggest junior high band programs in the area. These are just monster programs, wonderful programs. Do not allow guitar, don't allow modern band. At one of the schools, they can only hire a part-time choir teacher because the band director has such a hold on that. And it's tied up a lot with male patriarchy as well.
So, a lot of this, there's a lot to the conversation that we're having, because Bill, you brought up the economic side, and Tom is coming from, say, the Atlanta area, and I've been in situations. My first teaching job in Virginia, I was telling the panel before, my superintendent made a special budget for me at the beginning of the year and gave me a $500 budget to buy some new instruments for the band. And Thomas, you were talking about some similar situations in some of the urban areas, and is even introducing a music technology class or a guitar ensemble or some other instrumental type of ensemble even feasible?
I think it is. And again, this is so many ways we can look at it, and it can be a tough topic. But if you back up just a little bit, it even boils down to, can I get the students in a band class? So I know in some instances, depending on what it is, I know in one school that I worked at, that particular year, we were doing what was called small community. So I recruited 75 kids one year, and I was excited, like I'm gonna, this is my time to rebuild and just do everything I can. All of the kids signed up on their own free will and accord, and I couldn't put any of these kids in a band class. I was told that I could not put them in a band class. So
Wow.
I think it depends on, again, it's all about the area, but finding, it could be guitar, it could be electronic music. I know a lot of students are interested in the electronic side of music. Some of them they call it music production, or they might be interested in what they call making beats or whatnot. They may be into the R&B or into the rap or whatever. But introducing something, again, we're looking at the culture of the students. Are they into guitar? They may be a good bass player. They may play at church, but involving the students, ask them what they're interested in. Where are you from? And just being in an area like in Atlanta, Georgia, and being such a huge place, there's a lot of diversity, a lot of backgrounds. And there are some students that I've had that they have a rich church background, and they may want to play another instrument. They may play drums, and they find an interest in playing the saxophone of some sort. But I think if it works and you have those conversations with those students, then you have to, from a pedagogical standpoint, make some type of change where it will grab the attention of those students.
I'm curious.
We have that here. We actually have our middle school in the school district where my grandkids go to school. When the grade 5 students come in for their orientation to middle school, the middle school music teacher basically sits down with the kids and parents and says, look, we have 2 streams here. If you're serious about band and it's a full-time commitment to band, then you can take the band program. If you want another music approach, we have music electives in our elective blocks. And as it turns out, one of those electives is guitar. My granddaughter's going into high school this year, and she gets the choice of, which music elective do you want? Do you want guitar or piano this year? So it can happen. Again, as I've kind of said a few times, we do have a different system, different funding systems. And the competitive aspect isn't there. So there's sort of different achievement goals, if that makes sense, but it can be done.
Ruth, you had a good point in the chat that we had.
Yeah, I wanted my 8th grade band all together in one class, and that meant I had to fill up another class time. And we tried some different things, but I ended up taking guitar and working on a proposal to have guitar taught in our school system with another colleague. And what I found was I had kids who maybe band just wasn't for them, but they came back in guitar class and really, really became incredible musicians. I had one guy who was a flute player, and he was okay in band, and he picked up the guitar in my guitar class, and he found out that was his passion. That's the way he's going to make music for the rest of his life. And there is plenty of room for band. There's plenty of room for other music electives. Initially, I think directors were all a little afraid. I'm going to lose my program. I'm not going to have a job. And that's not true. There's plenty to go around. And if you think about, I think the statistic I read at one point was for a good high school program, they would have 12 to 15% of the school population in band, that's a lot of, that's 85%, at least, that we can be drawing these students into other music classes and enhancing their lives that way.
One of the interesting things that is on the democratic citizenship point is, the authoritarian leadership of band. We have to have this hold on things. I know when I first got to my current gig, one of the things that I can't remember who talked about it was that, if you want to participate in jazz band, you have to sign up for concert band. There's just no question about it. It doesn't matter to me what your personal feelings on that are. This is what it's going to be because this is how I'm running my program. And over the years, I've started to realize that that is isolating some students and not allowing them to participate in the avenue in which they feel most successful and most invested in. And I think part of that authoritarian thing is if we can get away from that, this is my band, and this is my program, and expand more and work with our colleagues across our cultural arts department, we can allow more kids avenues to express themselves musically. I don't know about everybody else on the panel, but band and choir sometimes get to be a big scheduling issue. So I, over the years have worked with my choir teacher to ensure that, if our largest audition-based groups are not on the same block, and if it is a scheduling issue that we can't avoid, then we find ways to share kids so that they can still pursue a divergent musical experience. And it's not, well, this is the way it's going to be no matter what.
Definitely.
I have some general concerns about guitar, mostly in that I can't play the cursed thing to save my life. So I legitimately would rather teach calculus. And if you knew how bad at math I was, I've taught guitar before, and I have very little to offer students in that pathway, but we do try to accommodate, especially if we have guitar players that come in, and try to work them in as best we can. One concern that I did have when I read the essay was, do we have any numbers that indicate these kind of classes, whether that's a music production class or a beat making class or guitar class, has any greater data point where it leads to lifelong musicking than band classes or choir classes or orchestra classes?
You can look at what people choose to do in life after school musically. And you can look at the statistics that the most played instruments in the country are drums, guitar, and keyboard. And so, yeah. And there are studies out there that show that very few band students continue to play. There was about 20 years ago, there was a study done with Texas All-Staters. And they found that very few of those students, less than 3%, continued to play after high school. So yeah, there's some research on that.
No, and that's a huge deal. And one of the key pieces of my philosophy of education from undergrad to now has been lifelong music making. So, and I think it's kind of like anything else, what's important to you becomes important to your students. So from the first day, before we've even talked about the Summer Music Aptitude Survey or what their mom played or what they would like to play, we talk about how there's band at the middle school level, and then at the high school level, and then there's college bands, there's military bands, there's community bands, there's church groups, there's combos and that kind of thing, and entertainment groups, and trying to make sure those students have that. I go through with my seniors every year and give them at least the contact information for whatever they're doing. If they're going to the workforce, if they're going to college, I haven't sent a kid to a college without the band director at that college having an email from me knowing that Timmy plays trombone and he's coming to University of Southwest wherever. And so I feel like, that 3% number is, I believe it, but I know my percentage is a little bit higher than that. It's certainly not as high as I'd like for it to be. And as somebody that plays music in a non-formal setting, in bars and in clubs and in that kind of thing, in addition to the gig here at school, I know what you mean by people playing guitar, but I'm concerned that what that class guitar looks like I'm not convinced that that's really connecting them in the way that we were talking about in the essay. You know, like the class guitar instruction that I've seen, to me, feels a whole lot like a band class with more strings. You know what I mean? Like I'm just trying to think. I'm not disagreeing with the concept that meeting the students where they are, connecting them culturally, and making sure that we're giving them the tools for lifelong musicianship. I think that's really important. I'm just not. I don't know. Keyboard class may be a better way because of the doors that opens and the chordal structure that gives them, and the lower threshold to entry. You know,
Grant, I got a different point of view on that, and a lot of it, and it goes, Vincent. It goes back to some of what you were talking about with the, and also Paul was talking about it in his essay about the corporate influence on music education. And, you know, when I think about that as a composer, if I want my music played, I've got to write for flute, oboe, bassoon, 3 clarinet parts, bass clarinet, full saxophone section, sometimes 2 altos, 3 trumpets, 2 to 4 horns, 2 trombones, maybe a bass trombone or a third trombone part, euphonium or baritone, and make sure you have the treble clef in there as well, tuba, and then the contemporary band director wants to have lots of percussion in their music so that they can occupy the percussionist time. And
setting fires in the back of the room.
Yeah. But I wonder, like, and a lot of that is pushed by the publishing industry saying that this is wind band music. This instrumentation is wind band music. And I know the historical value. I know, but even if you look at early wind band music, if you look at 19th century wind band music, it's not the same instrumentation, and it is a very contemporary thing for the standardization of the wind ensemble. And we totally rejected the wind ensembles within the traditionally African-American Black populations. When I look at one of the greatest wind ensembles out there, I look at Duke Ellington's orchestra. Duke Ellington's orchestra, that was a wind ensemble that did not have the classic educational wind band stuff. But as far as when we look at Ellington stuff, we look at his early music that kind of fit in the jazz band mold, and we totally disregard the later stuff. We don't really pull out the when he did his Nutcracker Suite, when he was writing in the woodwind section, he had clarinets, flutes, bass clarinet, as well as the saxophones, and he was writing specifically and changing the way the concept of jazz, and it caused an evolution in jazz. But we didn't adopt that. And, I know a lot of it has to do with where we were with racial tension at the time. But I'm wondering, like, have we boxed ourselves into a corner by standardizing the instrumentation of what is band?
Well, if I can speak on that, I think, I know that there are a lot of stock arrangements and across the board, from wind ensembles, spring ensembles, small ensembles, chamber ensembles. But I would say I think because of that tension during that era, and I'm not sure if there's any tension like that now, but I know there I wouldn't say most in the HBCU community, we have arrangers. We typically won't in the marching band, we won't go and get stock arrangements. We will get arrangements for the wind ensemble. And of course, we'll adjust there. But I think, when you think about people like Duke Ellington, what makes a lot of and I'm just speaking from the marching band aspect, what makes it different is that you had arrangers, and I'll speak specifically of Florida A&M University. Their longtime arranger, Lindsey Sargent, excellent jazz pianist. He added the color that he added to the sound of that group was amazing. And that's what a lot of the arrangers do now, because they want to add that a different flavor, a different color to their sound specifically. And to add to that, when you talk about lifelong or adding to the lifelong music making and whatnot, there's been an explosion in the HBCU community of what we call mass bands. So in the off season, once the students are out, and these could be people who are out of school, they do a summer type deal. It's not like a community. Well, it is a community band, but just for marching band. But then there are community bands where people are lifelong learners. They're still participating. So you still have the ensemble, the wind ensemble aspect, and now you have this marching band ensemble aspect of it. And I think that's, depending on, again, it's really about culturally connecting them. That, students are like, okay, well, I want to pick my instrument back up. Will they go to this concert band setting, or will they go to this marching band setting? 9 times out of 10, with the concert band setting, there are only a certain amount of seats that are available. And you have to audition, and if you're not good enough, you may not get in. With the marching band aspect, you may be able to get in, and it depends on the area. But I think the music making is there. I think it's about how we get in there and teach, especially if we have younger students that are able to, and if they can capitalize on doing these types of things, be it concert band or the marching band aspect. If we're doing some good pedagogical things, it'll definitely push them to continue on. It's about whoever's in front of that group and pushing the values of music education there.
Vince, we are over an hour here, and we need to round up, but I don't want to. I want to give you a chance to kind of talk about some of the things that we were talking about there, just to respond if you can.
No, I missed my chance by missing the meeting, so don't worry about me.
Well, I appreciate it. I know I going into reading your essay, I definitely did not have the same point of view that you have, and to be honest with you, we don't have the exact same point of view, and I think that's the purpose of this, is to open a dialogue. But I will say, in reading your essay, it has really caused me to reevaluate and to rethink. And Thomas, when we were on the phone earlier this morning, I told you that with my current position and thinking about this, where I am an older white male teaching in a community that is predominantly Black and brown, it has given me a sense of urgency to really find a way to really communicate with my community and make sure that what I'm doing as a band director resonates with the students, the families, and the community at large. So I want to thank both of you for writing your essays and getting us to talk about these topics, because they are topics that we need to talk about within the band community. And Bill, just give you a second to close things out. Oh, I think we got you muted.
It's a great discussion. I agree with you, Aaron. The whole point of the book was to open up the discussions, and sometimes these are hard. I mean, the arresting thing from Vince's essay for me was the anecdote about the director who just said, "I never thought about it, and I don't need to because I got enough kids."
Right.
And that, how heartbreaking. I mean, that just like stopped me in my tracks when I read that. And hopefully, as a community of conscientious music educators, we can put that to bed. And whatever we do with our students, we can work to meet their needs and not just use them as objects to satisfy our own. So.
All right, and Josh, we want to do a quick round table, round the board, just asking a simple question, and keep it short because we are over. When we started this with Bill, I told him our episodes only go for an hour, so we're already 10 minutes over right now. So, ask a question real quick, Josh.
So the out of the box on the way home question is: as we work to create lifelong musicians, does that mean that they necessarily have to continue actively playing their instrument after they leave our band room, or can that be creating lifelong lovers and advocators for music.
Grant, real quick.
So I think about it like a reading teacher. If I were teaching reading, I would want to ensure that my students were lifelong readers. How many people do you know or interact with that don't read? I don't have time. Okay, well, that's how I think about it with music. I want all my musicians to be lifelong musicians. Now, I know that that's not going to be 100%, but that's the goal that I'm striving towards.
Awesome. Thomas?
Oops.
I think you're muted.
All right, sorry. So I think it's twofold. Definitely, and I mentioned earlier, if you have younger students or if you are a parent, expose students or your children to music, and it doesn't have to stop. If they decide that they don't want to play past high school or college, there are some that they're just diehard supporters. So I think it's definitely twofold. If you are able to continue playing, it should not stop. And as you're doing that, bring somebody else into the fold of music.
Awesome. Ron?
I think I try to, I guess I'm educating music consumers. I really try, if they continue on their instrument, that's nice. If they continue on another instrument, that's nice. If they take up singing instead, that's nice. If they, I just want them to have an appreciation of and be able to choose what is good music.
Mike?
As much as I would dearly love to have more 20 to 25-year-olds come into the band, or even adults pick up their instruments later, we need audiences. We need people that will enjoy and support what we do. So yes, you don't have to play the whole time.
Ruth?
The one thing I've noticed with social media, I get to make all these contacts with former students, and what they received as their music education, they may not be playing now, but they're creating the next generation of performers and musicians and music consumers. And I think whatever they got from us early, they figure out ways to carry it on through their children.
Vince?
Yeah, sorry, it might be because I'm a band director that I go straight to the point. And that's, how's that going for y'all? Are you turning out a lot of great audiences for band concerts or orchestra concerts? The answer there is no. We've been trying this for a long time, but you're not developing audiences for band music.
Josh, did you want to answer your own question?
I think I'm good. I think we've been talking for a while, but
awesome.
I'm just happy to be able to pose it.
Yeah, thank you for all your help, Josh. Thank you all for coming on tonight. Bill, thank you so much for putting all of this together with your book. I mean, you've given us, by reaching out to these great philosophers and conductors, and you've given us some great questions to really ask about ourselves. So thank you so much. And if you guys will stick around after we close out, we're going to leave you guys. I want to thank all of our viewers, and I hope this is sparking conversations within your own band community. And hopefully the next 100 years of band will be even better and grow to stages that we can't even imagine now. You guys have a great one. Thank you so much for tuning in.